Today, we are going to talk about the reading section. Now, the reading section is the very first section that you will see as soon as you open up this test. It consists of 5 reading passages with a total of 52 questions to be completed in 65 minutes, unless you have extended time. In most cases, that means time and a half. So what exactly is the breakdown of these passages? Well, of the 5 passages, the first passage will always be some sort of a literary piece, which means it's some sort of a story that may have been written either, let's say, 500 years ago or 20 years ago. And because of such that vast sort of time frame in between, the language that it's written in can vary. So you might have something in Old English and maybe harder to understand, or something that's much more modern and therefore easy to swallow and actually comprehend. So with that, so that's just the first passage, and that's pretty much set in stone. The first passage will always be literary. Now, the next 4 are switch-ups between science and social studies / history. So of the remaining 4 passages, 2 of them will be science, and 2 of them will be either history or social studies. And they can either be back-to-back, so they may appear like science, and social studies / history, and science and social studies again, or it could be a toss-up. That's just something that the test makers determine, but overall it's always going to be 1 literary passage, 2 science passages, and 2 history or social studies. Now, before we get into the strategies of what to do before we actually start reading the passage, just to make sure that we are all on the same page and have the same question sets, this question set that I'm going to refer to in this video is from Collegeboard Test 1. This is not my property, it's completely Collegeboard. They release these exams for free, and the link for this PDF is included below in the description. So with that said, let's get started. Okay, so let's take a look at how to approach a reading passage from scratch. So when you first see the passage, and this is again from SAT Test 1, passage number 1, so therefore it's going to be a literary piece. So when you first see a passage, always make sure that you read the blurb. Now, what exactly is a blurb? Well, it's this little bit of information right here. So this piece of info actually can provide you with a lot of context as to what you're going to be reading about. In this particular case, it says that the setting is in Japan in 1920. That kind of gives us a bit more of a historical context. And the characters are basically members of a noble family. Why is this important? Because chances are, when we finally get down to reading, we may be interacting with someone who's not noble, and we have no way outside of this one little statement of knowing that this is going to be sort of a class issue of some sort, and so forth. So always make sure that you read that blurb. Students tend to overlook it because it's just the natural instinct to rush into reading the passage and answering the question. And that brings us to the next point, which is, while after reading the blurb, the natural instinct is to say, hey, I want to go ahead and read the passage, what we actually want to do is jump to the questions. Now, in this case, I set up my computer in a split screen mode so we can look at the questions and the passage at the same time. And when you get down to the actual questions, couple of things. 1, only read the questions. Do not read any of these answer choices. Why? Because once you read the question, you want those key words that may be in the question to stick with you, but you don't want to be influenced by anything that the answer choices may say. In fact, you actually just want to have as clear of a perspective as possible. So don't read the answer choices, only read the question. Now, when you're reading the question, while I am, yes, using colors for teaching purposes, you actually are not going to have access to any colors. You only have your pencil. No colored pens, no highlighters, nothing. So that means you have to do your best to get the information to stick out at you. You're not trying to memorize these questions. We're just trying to say, okay, let's keep keywords in mind. So maybe something will trigger when we get down to the passage, right? So in the case of number 1, it's a very general question. So we're going to have 2 types of questions. We're going to have very specific questions and very general questions. Now, numbers 1 and 2 in this particular case are both general questions. So it's just keywords I might say are what happens or what is a developmental pattern. Great, cool. But then when we get down to the next few questions, well, in this case, we're going to start getting more and more specific. So in case of number 3, so in the case of number 3, this is something we call a vocab in context question. or just a vocab question basically. And what you do for it. Well, it says, first of all, it gives you coordinates. It tells you this line and that line. Always keep those lines in mind, and we're actually going to mark them down. And then it has the keyword directly. So we're going to go into line 1 and line 65 and cross out, completely blur out the word directly. Why are we doing this? Because one of the first things you're going to do as soon as you hit that context is write your own word in. Now, that's not it, or that's not enough. Right after that, what you're going to do. So now that they tell us line 1, we're not just reading line 1 and then coming up with our own words. We're actually reading the context. So realistically, anytime you're given a line reference, you want to read somewhere around 5 up and 5 down. So in this case, we can't go any higher because it's already line 1, but we can go down. So that is going to be our window or our frame for question number 3. And always write down the question number next to it, because in the future, if you ever want to jump back and relook at some of these questions, then you don't have to go back and count again, or it's basically a time-saving strategy. Also, when you're reading, there will be multiple areas where you end up marking down brackets and our frames. So you'll actually get to see where your questions are coming from. Now, I'm not going to do this for line 65 simply for visual purposes. I just want half my screen to be with the questions. However, you will also do the exact same thing for line 65. Again, not answering, not even looking at any of these, just reading the question. And remember, when you actually put in your own word, you're going to write it in. And we will talk more about that on another video of just how to approach specific kinds of questions. But since this is just the pre-read, all we're going to do is cross off that and mark down our brackets for where we're supposed to find the answer for it. Okay, then the next question. So in this case, the question says, which reaction does Akira most fear from Chi? So reaction, most fear. So clearly, and here's the thing when they use words like most, well, that means there's probably going to be some other reactions involved as well. We're looking for the one that's completely at the top of her fear list, basically. So keep that in mind, and then we move on to the next question. Now, this one doesn't tell us, number 4 didn't tell us any specific location, so we're just going to keep going. And then number 5, so number 4 and number 5, I call them buy one, get one free questions because they're paired together, sort of okay, well, here's the question. Now, where did you find the answer for that question? So we're going to just skip over that. Number 6, what are keywords in this? Well, we can say, okay, well, how do they address each other? So Akira addresses Chi with, so we don't know. That's all we're going to underline. Now, this question number 7. So once again, and I'm going to put this back up. This was supposed to be question number 3, and we crossed that out. So now question number 7 says the purpose of the first paragraph. Well, the purpose of the first paragraph also happens to overlap with what we read for number 3. So once again, we're just going to, and again, you can extend it out just a little. It's going to be the same lines. I'm just putting it in different colors for visual purposes, but it's the same window frame. So I'm going to write the question number next to it. So in this case, question number 7. I think I said question number 5 before, I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is question number 7. We just wrote numbers 3 and 7 are going to come from the same line reference. So great. Next. Well, number 8 is just that vocab question that we talked about again. So in this case, the word form. You're going to find the word form right here. Once again, crossed it out. 5 up, 5 down, which for the 3rd time happens to be in the very same vicinity. So in this case, we have another question to add to this list. So we have question number 8. Now I'm squeezing this in a little because of the margins. Play with the space that you have when it comes to this. All right, then moving on to the next few questions. So finally, second to finally, I guess, number 9, we have, says his meeting is a matter of urgency, and it gives us a line reference. So I'm going to do 2 things. One, I'm going to underline the words that they refer to, which in this case, line 32. Okay, so this part is important. I'll keep that in mind when I'm reading it, that, hey, even if I completely zoned out for the rest of this passage, I should probably wake up again and pay attention because one of my questions is going to come from that. Once again, we're going to read 5 up, 5 down. So let's say roughly line 27-ish. Seems to be in a middle sentence type thing. So we're just going to start from here, line 28, and then go 5 down. So that's going to be line about 37, which we'll just complete out to here when the statement ends. And that will be question number 9. Now, question number 10 is pretty much one of the buy one, get one questions. Now, something to note for something like question number 10. Note that the question right before it gave us a line reference. We were able to mark down a rough frame of where we will find the answer. So because of that, our answer is going to have to come from that vicinity, which means I can eliminate at least 2 of these answer choices. Which ones? Well, this is a little bit out of the way. So C is out and D is definitely out of the way. So our options, without ever having read this passage so far, our options are just basically A and B. So with that said, that is how you map the questions out. This is what you do pre-read. Then the very next step is to read it, and that we will cover in the very next video.